My name is Sonali Vaidya. I'm part of Okta's sales engineering team. Been here more than 5 years now. I'm based in New York City, so I work with Okta's East Coast customers. So our session today is around all the different integration possibilities with Okta. I'm also going to be joined by 3 of our esteemed customers, Allergan, Wiley, and Alliance Data. And so after I finish my session, I will formally introduce Sandy, Sarvanan, and Darren to come up and talk about their own stories and challenges they solved with Okta. So getting right into it, just to set the stage for this discussion, right? We all know that enterprise IT and on-prem IT infrastructure is extremely complex. It is expensive. Many companies have grown from acquisition, so it's very common for us to have customers who have multiple different user stores. Often they're not consolidated because AD consolidation is, again, time-consuming and expensive. So we find that there's sort of untrusted domains. Users are being managed separately on different Active Directory stores. And then, of course, every business is now trying to be a digital business, right? I promised myself after all the negative press that I will not use the word digital transformation, so I'll stay away from that. But every business is trying to be digital, so you now have not only employees, but you have customer identities, you have partners to manage, and often those are in different user stores again, right? So there's islands of identity all over the place. And then a lot of the traditional systems for CRM or ERP, retail, supply chain, a lot of these are still on-prem systems. So although, most of you companies are in some shape or form in that journey to move on-prem services to cloud, the reality is that there is a lot of on-prem infrastructure to manage, right? If there is one thing I want you to take away from today's session, it is the fact that we at Okta are tirelessly working towards our mission to enable you to connect any type of user with any type of device to any type of technology, and doing so in a secure manner, right? That's really, at the end of the day, that is our mission. But if we want to become the identity standard, right, Okta talks about this vision of being the industry identity standard. The reality is we have to integrate with what you have today. Sure, we are great when it comes to cloud services, and we do that seamlessly, but we really do have to solve your problems today, which is integrating it with a lot of custom developed applications or services that are still maybe on-prem, or maybe they're hosted in the cloud, but they're still custom services. So with that, what are we talking about? We're talking about 18 different integration patterns that are supported today with your Okta service. And I'll let you digest that for a minute. So those are all the 18 different ways that Okta can potentially connect to a custom service or application. Now, you'll notice, obviously, that across all of these, many will solve authentication use cases. Some will solve authentication as well as authorization, MFA included. And some will solve more complex provisioning, deprovisioning, automating the lifecycle management of a user to downstream systems, right? So there's all kinds of use cases. I've picked a few for, to talk about today, to go into a little bit of detail, and then we'll hear more detail from our customers as well. So the first one that I'll talk about is Radius. Now, Radius is essentially an older networking protocol that was developed back in the 90s. still being used for a lot of services. So like the most common ones we see are VPN services, your Cisco ASA and Checkpoint. Many other VPNs use Radius. Reverse proxy type solutions like Netscaler uses, is capable of Radius authentication. So if you have any of these services currently, Okta can support your flows for authentication very well using a very lightweight design, right? In this flow, we have a Radius agent, so that's Okta's Radius agent, which installs on-prem. So the communication between the agent and your Radius client is basically internal to your network. Okta is obviously on the public internet. The only communication needed from Okta's Radius agent is outbound 443. So that's the only port you need to open on your firewall. Now, why would you use Okta for this, right? Because a lot of times you're already doing AD authentication for some of these use cases. The beauty of this design is, one, it's, the security is managed in Okta, the authentication is managed. You're already using Okta. The beauty is you can layer on multi-factor authentication. So in that request, which you send from your Radius client, let's say it's a Cisco client, or it's, whatever the user is trying to log into, in that single request, you can send credentials plus an OTP or a push. And that comes to the agent. The agent communicates to Okta. Okta does the primary authentication and then invokes the MFA and then returns a success or failure based on both. So the nice thing about this is you can now layer in multi-factor into some of the older services or flows that you wouldn't be able to easily do. We can also pass group membership back when that request comes to Okta. We can actually pass back information about the user to handle even authorization, right? So that's additional. The next one is the LDAP cloud interface. This is something that is just there, right? So if you have applications that are using LDAP authentication, then you can basically point those simply to Okta. Today, this service is capable of LDAP search and bind, so you can handle the authentication use case. And similar to Radius, you can also send the OTP or push in that initial request. Okta can process both primary and secondary authentication. This one is simple. There is no other component, right? The Okta service basically just provides you with an LDAP-S interface where it can process authentication requests. So the next one is OAuth. Now OAuth is a much more modern standard, right? OAuth is basically an open standard for token-based authentication and authorization. There is an identity layer that is based on the OAuth 2.0 protocol called OpenID Connect. That is the part that handles the authentication part. Now Okta as a service, your Okta service, has a OAuth compliant authorization server, which enables you to do fine-grained authorization. It is also an OpenID Connect certified provider. So you can handle both use cases for authentication from OIDC clients as well as fine-grained authorization. Now in this flow, we have the user accessing some type of service on mobile. There is a headless app in the backend. Now a headless app is basically an application that does not have a graphical user interface. It's basically doing some backend processing to the 3 APIs you see. That app essentially can delegate all of its authentication and authorization to Okta. And Okta returns the required JSON tokens, whether it's the ID token for the user's information and authentication success, or whether it's OAuth tokens for further authorization. You can also, basically you are protecting those APIs within Okta. You can also define scopes. So scopes are like permissions, what the user can do or is not allowed to do within those different API services, you can define all of those within Okta's authorization server. So this is obviously for much more modern app development, but most often, I would say most of our customers are in the journey to provide mobile apps for their own customers or vendors or partners. And this is useful because now if you're using Okta, you can build your authentication layer in your mobile apps or web apps directly into Okta. And a lot of that information is on our developer.okta.com. So anything you wish to learn about OAuth or OpenID Connect, please take a look at our developer.okta.com. The next one is a pretty common, I would say, deployment model. So in this model, you have on-prem web applications. You have a reverse proxy solution that basically protects the web application. And when the user tries to access that web application, the initial authentication and verification is handled by the reverse proxy. And once the user is validated, it then logs the user in or starts a session based on different mechanisms, but more often HTTP headers. Although there are other, there are other mechanisms like certificates, or there are other flows. But most commonly, I would say we see, the header-based flow is extremely common in this type of scenario. Now, Okta can augment this. So if you are already doing this, Okta can augment this flow by taking the load of all of those authentication flows, security policies, password policies, MFA policies, which you're already going to define in Okta. And your reverse proxy essentially delegates back to Okta. So user is accessing the application, the reverse proxy delegates back to Okta. The integration between Okta and the reverse proxy is based on SAML or OpenID Connect. And Okta can validate the user, do the MFA, plus pass any of the header information that the reverse proxy needs to pass into the specific application. So you can definitely protect your existing on-prem web applications in this manner. And we're going to hear more on this from one of our customers. So the next one is a company that we acquired about more than a year back, I think, called ScaleFT. And ScaleFT essentially does privileged access management for server access. So think about your, use cases for SSH or RDP type login to physical, Windows and Linux servers. And ScaleFT secures that flow. It also manages the local server accounts. It does some auditing on that process as well. Now this product is now fully integrated in Okta. It's called Advanced Server Access. And all of the policy framework is going to be available within Okta. So when let's say you're assigning a developer access to some servers or a system admin access to certain servers, you can do that through the same mechanism. You can do that through group management or however you do your assignment policies in Okta. There are two components here. So there is a client component that is installed on the user's device. There is also a server component, and that's installed on the physical server. And these two pieces will work with Okta's policy framework to grant the user one-time ephemeral certificates when the user is about to log in. So the flow is that the user tries to sign in, let's say, to a server through RDP or SSH. The first validation is the Okta validation. So first of all, we need a primary authentication, so user can be validated by Okta. That may be just their AD credentials or just their Okta credential. If you want to do MFA in this flow, you can, right? So same Okta flow. And then, of course, there's the authorization within Okta. So if that user is authorized to that server, then it will grant the user a one-time certificate, which is used for access. So there are no temporary credentials in this flow. Everything is handled using these lightweight one-time certificates. If the user gets disabled, it's a pretty quick reaction for the user to get cut off from all the other access. So they will not be able to sign into another server if the user gets disabled. And I think maybe this was in one of our demos, so I don't know if you guys caught that. And the last one, probably the one that handles the more complex use cases for provisioning, deprovisioning, basically managing user accounts in downstream applications. This flow is handled essentially by the SCIM framework in Okta. So think of for this, I mean, I would say think of the example of a database maybe that you have on-prem. You want to now automate the provisioning, deprovisioning, or you have a custom application that has some APIs that will allow you to create and update the user. You can now have Okta SCIM agent, which again goes on-prem. It's lightweight, talks to Okta on outbound 443. That SCIM agent in tandem with a custom module, that custom module will essentially do the SQL commands into your database, or that custom module will do the API commands to create the user in some custom service or application. In this way, you can centralize all of your user management in Okta, right? So now what you do is you manage that endpoint like another application in Okta. You see the same type of panel. You can say, I want to create, update, deprovision, and you can manage all of those flows. They all go through that SCIM agent and handle the downstream provisioning and deprovisioning. And we'll hear a lot more detail on this from two of our customers. So with that, we are ready for customer stories. And I'm very excited to introduce Sandy Dalal from Allergan. He is Director IAM Services, and Allergan is probably one of Okta's oldest customers. So thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon. My name is Sandy Dalal, and I'm responsible for Identity and Access Management Services at Allergan. Allergan's a pharmaceutical company, and we sell branded drugs. Our most well-known brand is Botox. We do research and development in a number of pharmaceutical areas, most notably medical aesthetics. In terms of our company, we have 23,000 people in our workforce across 110 companies worldwide. Allergan was Okta customer number 7. So we've had Okta in place since 2010. And so we definitely appreciate the journey we've taken with Okta and the partnership. This is a high-level view into our identity and access management ecosystem. As you can see, we have Workday as a master. So all of our employees and contingents are sourced out of Workday. We have Active Directory. So that's our corporate authentication store. And all users and groups in Active Directory are mastered by Okta. Okta is at the center of our ecosystem here. Provides a bunch of services that you're probably all familiar with: single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, API, lifecycle management. We use everything. And we use Aquera for automated provisioning. So Aquera is really, like, when you look at this ecosystem, really like the glue that ties a lot of these systems together. Okay, so the challenge that we had at Allergan is that we have an extensive sales force, but our salespeople weren't getting the access that they needed to applications in a timely manner. And so the way we provision accounts at Allergan, it's maybe not much different than some of your companies. We have a request process, an IT team gets a task, and they manually provision the account. In some cases with some of our cloud vendors, we provide lists, like through an eligibility or roster file, so they get a list of names and then they just provision those accounts in the cloud. What ended up happening was for our salespeople, it was taking up to 28 days for their IT onboarding to complete. And so there's a million business things that a salesperson needs to do in the first few weeks, like selling, learning, just a lot of things. So any problems with onboarding could completely derail them. It could push them back or set them back months. And in some cases, it could even discourage them to leave the company. Another challenge we had is that we lacked visibility across systems. So we didn't always know who had access to what. And that became a problem when people left the company and we had to turn off access to applications. So needless to say, I mean, there was a lot of business frustration across the company, as you can imagine. So the approach that we took to address the issue is that we decided to automate provisioning for the applications that were being used by our salespeople. And so we started to work with a company called Aquera. And Aquera's focus is really around building provisioning connectors and also these last mile integrations. And the reason why Aquera appealed to Allergan is that Allergan is cloud first. When we evaluate vendors, we want to see that they're in the cloud, and Aquera was a SaaS managed service. With SCIM, with Sonali, she showed us the slide on SCIM. The other good thing about Aquera is that there was really no custom coding. So at Allergan, like, we're not trying to build an internal DevOps. So working with partners that we could rely on to do custom coding was important to us. Another important advantage is that there was no infrastructure. If you've done anything with SCIM, like, you know, there's web servers and things of that nature, there was really no infrastructure that we needed at all with Aquera. The only thing we had to use was an agent that we installed on-prem. If you've used the on-prem provisioning agent with Okta, or if you've used the Active Directory agent, it's very much the same thing. It just allows Aquera service to talk to any applications that sit inside your firewall. One other thing is that I'm sure you've all added applications from the Okta Application Network. Some of those applications have provisioning capabilities. In Allergan's case, we tried some of those apps, and in some cases they just didn't meet our requirements, so we could not use them. The real nice thing about Aquera is it's just plug and play. So if you want to provision to an application, all you do is you add an application from their catalog, and then there's an Aquera application in the Okta Application Network. You add that application, and it's just configuration at that point. So there's usually a SCIM endpoint URL you need to configure. You can get that from Aquera and just paste that into the configuration. And you map any attributes that are needed by the connector, and that's pretty much it. I mean, I know SCIM's pretty complicated, but I think Aquera did a really good job of really removing that complexity for us. So, I mean, in some ways, I think Okta had a gap that Aquera really helped us fill. Okay, so this is how we used Aquera's technology. So I mentioned the example of sales onboarding and some of the challenges we had. We knew from our HR system who our salespeople were, but we didn't really know from the HR record what access or what application access they needed. We couldn't determine that. So we did have an internal database called OrgMan, which acted as the source of truth for salespeople. So what we ended up doing was we used Aquera to connect OrgMan to Okta. And once we had a connection, we were able to import specific attributes from OrgMan into the Okta profile. Those attributes were mastered by OrgMan. From there, what we did is we created group rules within Okta. And with those group rules, we were able to assign users to the applications that salespeople needed to do their jobs. So once they get assigned to the application, we had the connector that we built with Aquera, it would automatically provision the account. Similarly, when someone left the organization, in our case, we had Workday as a master, so they get terminated in HR, and that would trigger IT offboarding. So what would happen immediately is that their Okta account would get turned off, which would stop single sign-on to any applications they had access to. And in addition, because we had the Aquera connectors, it would also deprovision those accounts. So this really helped meet our compliance needs. We also use a tool, RSA, and with RSA, it's really like for identity governance. So we're an audited organization, and so we have to do security access reviews and recertifications and things of that nature. And so RSA had a SCIM interface, and a lot of what you need in RSA is data-driven. So we were able to leverage some of the connectors that we built with Aquera to pull in information from some of the apps we connected to, including Okta, into RSA without like really any additional effort. Once we had that data, our Allergan people were able to do security access reviews with real-time and rich data to make better decisions on access. The other additional benefit that we had is that we had a view across applications at Allergan. So this is like a common scenario, but when someone leaves the company, they generally get terminated in the HR system. We could quickly find out if they had active accounts in other applications, and if they did, we can detect them and remediate them. So, the integration helped, and RSA really became a detective control for us in turning off access when people left the company. So with this platform, we had Workday as a source of truth for employees and contingents, and we had Orgman as a source of truth for our Allergan salespeople. Both of these systems were hooked into Okta. And when Okta was coupled with Aquera, it provided the automated provisioning services. We had RSA, which is doing the identity governance, also hooked in with Okta to complete the picture here. Today at Allergan, we have about 400 apps that we've integrated with Okta. And I'd say primarily most of those are single sign-on enabled. In the last year, 2018, we added about 120 apps, or integrated about 120 apps alone. And I would say about 15% of our total are apps that have some kind of automated provision capability. And now that we've unlocked this capability with Aquera, we're ready to ramp up. So I think the key takeaway on this picture is you have a single line from your source of truth into IT. So if we have a new salesperson who joins the company, they get added to Workday and they get added to Orgman, and all IT actions downstream are automated. There's no manual intervention required. So automated provisioning drove a lot of value for Allergan. We can now onboard hundreds of people at a time, and the faster we can provision their accounts, the faster they're productive for Allergan. And Aquera really drove a lot of value for Allergan as well, in that they were able to eliminate the cycles it took to provision accounts, and that resulted in generating top-line dollars for the organization. So in the end, Allergan IT was viewed as a hero. We had implemented a solution with Aquera to automate the provisioning of accounts for our salespeople, and our IT onboarding process improved tremendously, as you can see from some of the metrics here. And Aquera really helped. They empowered our users, they made our Allergan sales organization really happy, and they really helped our bottom line. I hope you enjoyed that. I'll be around for any questions after the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandy. So in the interest of time, I'm going to call our next speaker, Sarvanan Tyagarajan from John Wiley, and he is Director IAM Services for John Wiley. So welcome and thank you. It's the clicker. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarvanan Tyagarajan, who heads Identity and Access Management for Wiley. So just a quick background. Who is Wiley? What does we do? Wiley has been 200 years old heritage of publishing. What do? We develop digital learning products and solutions. We support researchers to communicate their discoveries that brings a value add, or in some cases that makes a difference. Then we also provide online content in journals, books, and other digital content. So just wanted to set the stage. What are the business challenges that what we are trying to solve today? The first one is more or less everyone would be facing it, high volume of password resets. Error prone during the onboarding process, or lack of visibility into user access and applications or permissions. The most important one is loss of productivity and the high operational cost. If you look at it, all these are interlinked one way or the other. When the new joiner started, and if he or she doesn't have access to the applications, obviously there will be a lot of frustrations. That turns into a lot of productivity loss. In turn, they will be generating a lot of tickets, and that ended up in high operational cost. So I'm going to spend good time in this slide, which resolve most of the problem statements. As we can see, in my use case, SuccessFactors is the HR system, and HR system is SuccessFactors that gets integrated into Okta through our custom-built SCIM platform. Now, why do we need to go with custom build? Because we started this journey 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago. At that time, the connectors were evolving over a period of time. In our scenario, due to the time constraints and everything, and due to Wiley specific requirements, we ended up doing custom SCIM platform. We started building the SCIM platform. So how did we start building the SCIM platform? As mentioned by Sandy and others, SCIM platform, you have to have on-prem agent. That's all you need to have on your on-prem agent, and you're going to build the platform. The technology behind the SCIM platform is all purely microservice. We used Spring Boot, Spring Cloud, and we also need to use Okta SDK and Okta on-prem agent. So as I mentioned earlier, the reason for the SCIM connector, custom SCIM connector, is due to our requirements, some of the writebacks and other things weren't available at that time. I'm sure now it is available. We can make use of those connectors. Now the other use case that I wanted to mention, primarily or mostly people will use SCIM for provisioning applications that are on-prem. In my scenario, on-prem applications, I do have multiple on-prem applications. I'm going to just select Clarity is one of my on-prem applications. So we started building the first SCIM for the SuccessFactors. We call it as an upstream. Reason because we are pulling the data from SuccessFactors and we are sending it into Okta. In the second use case, from Okta, when a new user is provisioned, okay, I wanted to provision the user in my Clarity system, which is on-prem, which exposes web service. So we used the same SCIM connector or the gateway to provision to the downstream applications. The third use case is a little bit interesting. I'm not sure how many of you are planning or using bots for provisioning and deprovisioning. Even today morning, one of the keynote speakers mentioned they are heavily investing in blockchain and robotic process automation. So in the third scenario, which is AS400 system, if you go and ask, can you expose your web service API? There's no API. So then how do we deprovision, which is a normal problem. So in that case, we were debating whether we can do scripting or what are the other technologies we can use. Scripting do help, but it doesn't solve a lot of problem. One of the challenges, when one user has multiple accounts, I think in AS400 they call it as profiles. If you have multiple profiles, it's tricky to correlate this person has one profile or multiple profiles. In those scenarios, you cannot automate those scripting. So we started using the bots. What is the robotic automatic process does is, once the user gets disabled in Okta, all we do is using another SCIM microservice, we write a ticket into the ServiceNow queue. That's it. The SCIM code will say, my process is done. I notified the ServiceNow queue. So the bots wake up, and then it goes to the ServiceNow queue, and then it will identify who the user is getting terminated, and then goes into AS400 green screen. I wish I could have a demo, but it's due to time constraint, I couldn't put the demos there. So it goes into green screen as human does, like an AS400 administrator, finds out the people, and then disables it. When it disables, it also takes the picture that it is disabled, and it stores for it for auditing purpose. So if internal audit or any of your auditing team wants to take a look at it, hey, can I have the screenshot? Well, there is a screenshot. There is a queue, there is a ticket which is open, there is an incident reported, there is an incident that's also closed. So probably I should say, Sonali, there is a 19th integration pattern which would be bots. So here is a quick solution outcome. I said, like, what are the problem statements. So here are the benefits by using SCIM. Just wanted to give you a little bit more context. To develop your own SCIM, it's not a rocket science. First time it would be a little challenging, but there are good training sessions by Okta, SCIM for developers, and there are good tutorials in the Okta developer guide. So you can refer to that place. So the solution outcomes are, we can see that 80% reduction in password reset. User onboarded, right? Earlier it took more than a day, not many number of days, but we were running into days. Now it takes only less than 2 hours. We are trying to become, right now it's near real time. We are trying for real time. Sooner I'm sure we can achieve that. So the 60% reduction in new hire rates, because almost not all, majority of the on-prem applications are getting integrated into Okta's platform using the SCIM platform. So provisioning for targeted applications which are on-prem can be easily achievable. So in turn, it reduces the audit by 70%. So the manual hours are significantly reduced. And these are the business benefits. As I mentioned, it enhances the user experience, because day one, when the user walks in, new hire comes in, they know where to sit, they have their laptop, they will have Office 365, they can start their first day in a very productive manner, rather with a lot of frustrations running to help desk, hey, I don't have access, how do I create tickets? Then the last point is rapid application onboarding. So this gives a confidence to the business teams, business owners, that we can get any type of applications and we can quickly onboard them. The last one is automated hire to retire process. Thank you all. For any questions, I'll be around. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Sarvanan. I'm going to invite our next speaker, Darren Linden. He is Director IT Services at Alliance Data. And thank you, Darren, for being here today. So this is your mic clicker.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon. That's okay, I can go first, yeah. I realize I'm standing in between you and keynotes or happy hour or whatever your schedule is, so I will try to be brief. My name is Darren Linden. I'm Senior Director of IT Services at Alliance Data. I want to walk through quickly our multi-cloud data center journey, partnering with Okta and SPGateway. What is Alliance Data? Alliance Data is multiple businesses, 3 distinct businesses. We're ultimately the engine behind loyalty and marketing programs for over 1,000 consumer-facing companies. We have 20,000 users around the globe. But what we do at Alliance Data, we're basically a holdco. We provide the large, mature enterprise systems and applications that consolidate and run our business. That is our role. We started out pre-Okta with major IT problems. Our business model is acquire, but not necessarily integrate. We loosely couple our business units together. The vision is let them do what they do, but then at the end of the day, we have to roll up all the performance for planning, financial close, human resources, intelligence, this sort of thing. This is what we do. So we had a very aged Microsoft stack. We had multiple business units that had the same naming space, so we had conflicting naming spaces. We had no SSO. We had, different LOBs that used different user credentials to log into these systems. It was very fragile. And probably the worst part from an IT standpoint is we had very smart people who spent basically every day trying to keep the thing working. That drove frustration in the business. We always had outages. As Murphy has it, mostly during close and month-end forecasting. It's very frustrating, and we essentially couldn't scale this environment, so we had to come up with a new plan. So we basically took a clean whiteboard and we said, what do we want to do? Well, our number one goal was to provide basically a single user experience across the entire 20,000 seat population, regardless of line of business or location. We needed to provide MFA. We didn't have that prior. And services like self-service password reset. Okta was a slam dunk for us. It made the most sense. It's the best in the market in terms of SSO and SaaS, kind of that user experience. But we had a major gap. We have very large on-prem complex applications, mostly in the Oracle space, which we needed kind of a hybrid solution, and that's where SPGateway came in. SPGateway essentially fronts these applications. They look like a cloud app to our end user. Everything is in the Okta portal, and it's great. Not only is the end user experience great, but we increased our security posture, basically a zero trust environment. And we were able to do this without really major integration or project work within the lines of businesses. So as we built this out, we kind of started with Alliance Data itself, and then we rolled on business units into this environment. So business benefits, there's several. From an end user standpoint, I kind of mentioned it's a single user experience no matter what business you work for or what location you work for. You log into your computer and you authenticate to your local Active Directory, and that gets passed through Okta. We talked about, increasing our security posture with MFA, and we basically didn't have to do a bunch of customization on our applications to make this work. Most importantly for us, it gave us a cloud-first posture. Like most businesses out there, we want to get out of running our data centers, so we needed to get basically these large mature apps out of the on-prem data center. So that led us to what we call the lift and shift phase. We basically extended this architecture to OCI in AWS. This architecture led the way for us to quickly move our entire Oracle ecosystem to OCI and many of our other business apps to AWS. We essentially have no on-prem data center at this point, thanks to the power of Okta and SPGateway. In summary, it's a great solution for us. At the end of the day, it gives us the agility to keep up with our business. As we acquire companies, it's easy to snap on a business unit. We can turn on a business service, we can turn off a business service, or we can decouple a business unit. It reduced the complexity for both IT and our end user population while improving our security posture, and really drove an A service for us. The business is happy now, systems are online, accessed anywhere, anytime, from any device. So just wanted to highlight a great partnership with SPGateway and Okta. Thank you.